Hello, 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 and welcome back to the More Money Podcast. This is episode 308, and oh, hello, I am your host, Jessica Morehouse. Welcome back to the show. So excited, just 2 more weeks of the podcast and take a little break for the holiday season. Hopefully, you're going to take some time off this holiday season too, because we all, man, do we ever deserve a break? This has been a year. Anywho, so excited though to end things off on, just like a bang. I think I kind of killed it this season. I'm really proud of all the episodes and amazing guests I've had on the season, including today's guest, Parween Mander. She's someone I've been following on social media for quite a while because, she's just been very inspirational, and I think she's a fan of the podcast. She was listening to the podcast, for a while, which is kind of cool. That I'm like, oh, I'm a fan of you, she's a fan of me. I love that. I love when that happens. So Parween is a South Asian money expert on a mission to provide honest and relatable financial coaching for women of color from immigrant upbringings through one-on-one coaching and mentoring. And she built a net worth of $100,000 by the age of 26 and is on a mission to help other women of color overcome their financial traumas and build generational wealth. And Parween is the founder of the Wealthy Wolfe, holds an Accredited Financial Counselor Canada designation, just like yours truly. Hey. And she is also a certified Trauma of Money Facilitator. Honestly, it's really kind of cool that she has the same designation as me, because honestly, I have not met that many people that have an AFCC. So that was pretty cool. She's also from Vancouver, which is my hometown, which is very cool. So we really dive into so many amazing topics in this episode. She's an amazing guest, so can't wait to share this episode with you. But before I get to that interview, just a few words I want to share about this podcast's episode sponsor. This episode of the More Money Podcast is supported by Motley Fool Canada. You know that I'm a diehard index investor, but what you may not know is I've got a little satellite portfolio on the side for some individual stock investing. Don't get me wrong, I'm still a passive investor practicing a long-term buy and hold strategy with these stocks, but this has been something I've been doing for a few years now. And one of the resources I use to help with research and stock recommendations is Motley Fool's Stock Advisor Canada membership. Now, what drew me to Motley Fool Canada was that they share my same investment philosophy. They aren't about day trading or getting rich quick. They encourage buy and hold stock investing, making sure members are diversified, understand risk tolerance, and they even recommend investing in index funds. And most importantly, they want to educate Canadians about building wealth just like I do. So if you're interested in learning more about stock investing specifically, consider joining over 70,000 of your fellow Canadian investors today by signing up to Stock Advisor Canada. And if you visit fool.ca/Jessica, you can save 66% off your membership. Once again, to sign up and get 66% off, visit fool.ca/Jessica. Welcome, Parween, to the More Money Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Jessica, for having me. Being on your podcast is definitely a dream of mine, so I'm so excited to be here and chat with you.
And you are the most gracious guest because we have tried this 3 times. We've tried this 3 times because of my tech issues. That is the fun part of doing this podcast remotely. But
totally.
Here we are. We're going to make it work. So thank you. And thank you.
Absolutely.
I feel like such a noob when I'm like recording. I'm like, I swear I have been doing this for 6 years. But hey, these things happen. Welcome to the digital age. So anyways, I'm so happy that you're on the show because number one, I think you are so inspirational for everything that you've done at such a young age. Honestly, I think I was just starting to learn literally just basic money management at your age, and you're already totally ahead of the game. Money coaching, creating your own financial education content. You're an AFCC, just I am, which if anyone doesn't know what that is, because no one does, it's right. Accredited Financial Counselor Canada. You and me know. Everyone else who has the designation knows. Have you? I guess not, but have you ever gone to any of the? I don't think they have done them for since the pandemic, but they used to do like a conference for AFCCs.
Yeah. So like
did you ever go to any of those?
When I got my designation, it was like literally the pandemic the year after. So like the conference became like the virtual one. So I never had to like fly to Toronto for the conference.
Was there was a virtual one?
Yeah, it's like based in
I don't
the
know
US.
if I knew about that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's why I was wondering. I'm like, oh, I guess they're just not doing anything. Shoot. Maybe I totally missed the boat on that. Did that happen
the Canadian
Did that happen like this year, like in 2021?
It happened last year, like around this time, and it's happening again, like in like 2 weeks or something like that.
I did not get my email, so I'm going to have to follow up on that because
Yeah,
I just
for sure.
spaced. Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I did not get, or I do have a tendency to, delete emails. You're like, I'm like, oh, this isn't, I just like don't look at them like, oh, what is this, spam? And then delete. And so that's exactly what happened. I'm sure it's in my deletes. Okay, cool. Well, good to know. I'm going to look into that later. But anyways, that's not why we're on the show. But like I mentioned, I've been following you on social media for quite a while. And I find, as a young Canadian who you just have such and also a very unique perspective. And I'm excited to kind of really dive in. But I think it was really awesome and I think unique about you is really your background and your story. And you're really not afraid to talk about certain topics that I think, most people might not know how to talk about it or might, kind of shy away from it, which is really, things like financial trauma and generational wealth and being a woman of color and also a child of immigrants. So let's kind of start with your background and your story. Kind of how did you eventually come to a point where you're like, I want to not only better myself financially and improve my financial literacy, but also help others?
Yeah, for sure. So my sort of journey with money started when I was 16 years old, when we almost lost our childhood home, the one I'm literally sitting in right now. And at the time, being the eldest daughter of immigrant parents, where, English was a language barrier, I was responsible for translating what the bank, representatives were saying to my parents. So I was very overly exposed to adult financial matters at such a young age. And what that experience taught me was, hey, if you don't have money, that means you lack safety, power, control. So that must mean if you have money, you have those things. So at a very young age, I vowed to myself to become financially independent so I wouldn't be put in the same position as my parents, where money was, again, just a tool for survival, right? I really wanted to enjoy and thrive with my money. So 10 years later, at the age of 26, I hit my 100K net worth. And I'm really on a mission to empower other women from similar upbringings do the same, because when I was on this journey, there was no one who looked like me out there, right? Talking about finance, talking about the immigrant experience. It was just the dudes at the bank, and that was not very welcoming.
Or just a bunch of white people like me.
Right.
Right? Like, it's true. Like, when I started learning about personal finance a decade ago, there was not a single person I could point to that was a person of color. Really, no. Maybe a few financial journalists that I followed, but otherwise the typical money experts you'd see on TV or quoted in the news or like, talking heads on the news, all white people and predominantly men as well.
Absolutely. And so we're just missing this whole conversation around personal finance because, I generally find that the personal finance advice is sort of centered around individualism, right? Kind of looking out for yourself. But I come from a collectivist culture, meaning it's sort of this idea of community over self, which like in some ways is beautiful, but in other ways can also be kind of toxic. But regardless, so when it came to personal finance, it was like, I am responsible for my parents' retirement, right? No one's really talking about how I'm supposed to balance my own needs, but also that of like my family. So yeah, it was just such a gap.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about that. I think that's actually just very interesting because, my culture, I mean, just, I don't know. It's very, like you said, individualistic. There's not so much the idea that I'm going to take care of my parents, and my parents didn't really take care of their parents. Like they did in certain respects, like, health issues and stuff like that. But in terms of finances, it was no, you need to make sure that you are taken care of. And if anything, it's the grandparents still kind of tried to like they took care of some of my, uncles and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really, it is kind of a bit of I don't know how to describe it, but I guess like the term that always comes to mind is like that bootstrap mentality. It's like you just need to figure it out, or if you can't afford it, you need to work harder. Or it's always every man for themselves kind of mentality, which is one way to, I guess, motivate yourself to improve your financial situation, but it's also a lot of freaking pressure and may not, I do think there needs to be a balance of like what you can personally do to improve your life, but also there needs to also be greater change in your smaller community, your greater community, society, and things like that. I've been struggling with that, I think, a lot the past few years, just talking to more people with different backgrounds and experiences. Because me growing up, that was you have to figure it out on your own. And I thought, oh, that's great, because that's that'll make me stronger and work harder. But also, like, that's just not necessarily the right, I think, fit for most people. And it also, I think, doesn't leave any room for the talk about generational wealth, which has been a big topic lately, and also just circumstance. Like, I'm very privileged. I don't, it's funny because I never thought of myself, and I think a lot of people in my situation who grew up like lower middle class never thought of ourselves as privileged, because there's always other people who had way more than us. But there's so many things that I do have or did have compared to people that, like, I cannot imagine what it is like to immigrate to Canada. Like, my grandparents on my dad's side immigrated to Canada, but they're from Scotland. It's not really the same,
right.
It's not like they were immigrating from a war-torn country or leaving a real, with nothing. They came here and, he set up a bakery and she was a teacher. Like, they had to go back to school and start from, a lower level than where they were, but it's not the same. Not the same.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, this concept of privilege, right? I think, because even for me, I definitely got privilege myself too. And I think it's important that I acknowledge that. Like, I am able to live at home because, again, in collectivist culture, especially within South Asian cultures, it's very normal for adult children to live at home until they're married. Right. And so I always preach, it's like, yes, I was able to save more because, I'm living at home, but that money is almost sort of like saved for like the future of me sort of giving back to my parents as well. Right. Because at the end of the day, I am still responsible, or will be, partly responsible for, their well-being when they're older. But yeah, I think privilege is just a conversation that I think is starting to happen a lot more. I'm seeing, more influencers, or financial influencers, as we call them, speak to that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that aspect.
Yeah, but I think the tricky thing that I'm always kind of struggling with is because, lots of traditional financial advice was very focused on like the individual, what you can do, take responsibility. If you just do this, this, and this, you can see an improvement. But now that we're having more conversations about, well, it's not just about what you can do. Sometimes it is like circumstance, and, we're not all starting the race at the same starting line.
Totally.
How do we kind of balance it? Or should we get rid of some of the old financial advice, or what? Like, one example is I posted an Instagram reel lately that's been getting some traction, for better or for worse, but it was really just an example of compound interest. I used the example of, if you started with $1,000 and then continued to contribute $1,000 every single month for 20 years, you'd get like $500,000 by the end of 20 years.
Yeah.
So many comments being like, how on earth am I supposed to get $1,000 per month? Like, that's crazy. Like, I can't afford that. And just like, you have no concept of what people can afford. I'm like, well, I cannot obviously make a simple Instagram reel and address every single income level. Like, it's just an example.
Yeah.
But at the other end of it, I was also thinking, I understand everyone has a different situation, and some people, like, they just don't earn that kind of money, and that's just the reality of it. But I was seeing a lot of the comments and kind of thinking, they're saying this and they're explaining this, but I also kind of like, I think maybe it's just from my background of learning a lot of this traditional, kind of old school financial education of the don't complain, find a solution, take responsibility. And I feel like I'm really conflicted. I want to empathize, but I also want to motivate and give solutions, but I'm just not even sure what to do at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I see that a lot with like articles from like Refining 29 or the Money Diary series. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, where it's like how so-and-so like saved up for a down payment. And like some of the numbers are really extravagant, and it shows like, they were given a gift by their parents to help with the down. And people in the comments are just like, this is so out of touch and like just so not realistic. And so I definitely feel like there's a little bit of like, again, just kind of be acknowledging of the sort of what's realistic for some people to attain and what's also more relatable. But at the same time, I mean, I do agree with you with the sense of like, at the end of the day, there are some systematic things, hinder some people from, entering at the same level as someone else. Right. And so like for my parents, that was the language barrier, right? There wasn't necessarily, Punjabi financial literacy for them. And so they missed out on, starting an RSP at a young age. even with an RESP, they were told it was, a fraud, like a fraudulent scam thing to do. And so they started it very late. Yes, I walked away with like maybe $4,000, but my siblings who are younger have a lot more than that because, again, they didn't know any better, right? Same thing with like real estate. Like in Indian communities, real estate is actually one of like the sort of, and I think for a lot of immigrant communities, real estate sort of like the idea of like the best investment is real estate. And I think a lot of, at least I know, Indian families have made their wealth through that, but also teaches the next generation the wrong thing, which is like, oh, put all your eggs in one basket.
Just like that's the only way to grow your wealth.
Yeah. And like, I live in Vancouver. To enter the real estate market is just so insane that I can't imagine that being my only sort of source of like diversifying my wealth.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just so many layers to this.
There's so many layers. Yeah, it's a complex situation. I feel like back like 10 years ago, it was a lot simpler, but I think it was a lot simpler because we just ignored a bunch of factors.
Absolutely. Yes.
And put everything back on the individual to be like, well, and I think that's honestly a big reason why I sometimes don't love the FIRE community. Like I love the idea of achieving a big goal, but I feel like it really does ignore a lot of these factors. It's like, a lot of the people that achieve FIRE make 6-figure salaries. So why, so it's not necessarily possible for everybody to retire by 35.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think when I look at the FIRE community, I just get a little bit concerned about how much they preach frugality. And this idea of like just living so scarcely. And I'm like, what's the point? Like, then when you have the money, are you going to spend more or are you just going to like maintain this lifestyle? And again, no hate or disrespect to anyone who chooses that lifestyle for them. But I get concerned with just how much of that message is being put out there. And I think when we come back to the idea of like money trauma and triggers and stuff like that, it's not really a healthy lifestyle for everyone.
No. Yeah, I think the big issue is the extreme, and that's I've always had issues with like extremes. Like that's why FIRE. I'm like I think there's so many great elements, but there's a lot of extremes that kind of freak me out. That I feel like can probably have some negative effects maybe to your mental health or even your physical health. Gosh, if you're living like super frugally, but also even for like some of the extremes, like when I was just starting to blog, FIRE wasn't a thing, but the huge topic was debt and paying off. Like the big stories weren't so-and-so reached this net worth at this age. It was so-and-so paid this amount of debt by this age. Like that was the huge thing, probably because we're just coming out of the recession. So everyone had debt. Makes a lot of sense. And so that was like kind of the splashy story. But again, it was like and then you read these stories, like how did these people pay off like $200,000 in debt in 2 years? Like that's wild. It's because they lived like extreme lives. Or even like, I don't know if you remember the show, I'm not sure if it's on air anymore, but like extreme couponers. These people went to extreme lengths just to get free groceries. You're like, they could just be spending that time and energy on maybe a bit like an actual business model.
For sure.
So it's the extremes that I feel like it's kind of like, I've probably said this on the show so many times. It's like a crash diet. It'll work in the short term. The long term will have some possibly negative after effects. So you just need to be aware of what are the consequences of living in an extreme way, whatever that means.
Absolutely. And I mean, for myself too, I kind of went through a similar experience. Again, because of my experience with money and this idea in an immigrant, upbringing, money was a tool of survival. It was like, money's only spent in times of like need, not necessarily wants. And so when I got into my 20s and I got my job and, I had student loans to pay off, I was extremely frugal. I was stuck in a cycle of having extreme anxiety, partying with my money, being really frugal, and just, anytime I would spend and buy myself like, a latte or whatever, I would just be so hard on myself. And I was like, man, this cannot be sustainable. Like, this sucks. Like, I'm making more money than I ever have, but this sucks. And so being caught in that cycle of like depriving myself and then being so fed up that I deprived myself that I would just binge spend on random crap because I deprived myself and then feeling guilty for that. Put in like kind of, being stuck in that cycle over and over again. And it was only when I again like stopped to reflect, hey, where the heck is this coming from? Like, where is this like fear and like anxiety of like letting all my money go coming from? that started to make some breakthroughs and be like, you know what, like this is enough of that cycle. I need to be able to enjoy money, still be responsible. It's all possible. But yeah, so that's why, again, when I see the fire community, like for me, it is triggering because that was
Yeah.
a cycle that I was in and I didn't enjoy it. But
Mm-hmm.
they've glamorized it to a point where I'm like, oh, maybe that is the way,
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned, the word trigger. I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I feel like I wish these words existed a long time ago, like the word
Yeah,
trigger and the word gaslighting. Oh my gosh. I'm like,
totally.
oh, that's what that is. I totally relate to you. I mean, I feel like we had different upbringings, but also
Hmm.
so many similarities. Like, I grew up in a very frugal household, and it is like a
Hmm.
generational thing because we, pretty much on both sides of my family never had money. And
Hmm.
so, how we can control our financial lives, there was never really any talk about investing or building wealth or building a business or anything like that. Absolutely not. It was literally just living within your budget, living within your means, frugality. And so, hey, I learned some great things when I was an adult because they were in me,
Right.
as natural habits. But like you said, also, I still in my mid 30s have a hard time treating myself to like little things like
Hmm.
a coffee. I'm like, do you really need that fancy coffee? Like still. And I'm
Hmm.
like, wow, all these years I still have this.
Yeah.
Even though I'm like, girl, you can afford a latte.
Yeah.
It's fine. You
Yeah.
can afford it. It's fine. So I'm curious, and I'm sure too, since you work with clients one on one, I'm sure you encounter a lot of, things like this and people, certain things triggering them. Like I think, when I'm online, there's if someone posts a certain thing,
Mm.
there's certain things that do trigger me. And I'm
Yeah.
like, interesting, where does that stem from? So I'm curious, like, how does one even first, I guess, recognize? Because I feel like sometimes it's
Mhm.
even hard to recognize when you feel a certain way like that. Like
Yeah.
I feel like we get triggered so much on social media, we almost don't even recognize when it
Yeah, for sure.
happens, right? And then what do you do about it? How can you work through that so you can not feel like that forever?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a complex topic, we'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I see with a lot of my clients, again, who are generally women of color from collectivist cultures, is this idea of keeping up with the Joneses, right? This comparison game with like their friends, maybe another family, their cousin, etc., and feeling so inadequate that it leads them to, stuff like overspending, or again, the other side of it, which is like the having a hard time spending money on themselves. And so the first thing, I help them do is just really understand like what in their environment leads them to feeling, a certain way about money, which is more so a negative feeling about money. So whether that's frustrated, whether that's again inadequate, whether that's anxious, stressed, whatever it might be, what are some things in their environment? And again, this could be as simple as logging into their bank account, right?
Mm.
And seeing their credit card statement and then being like, nope, then like completely shutting down because, that stresses them out, right? Or it triggers something in them. That's a trigger. Or maybe it's a certain friend who, if they always see, roll up, or if they message, to go out, like that's also triggering. Because again, this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. And so I think when it comes to triggers, it's, both sort of tangible things, like again, like opening up a bank statement, but also people around you, right? Who can also be, unfortunately, triggers. And then again, like your environment as well plays a big factor.
Yeah, I guess, that's the thing. I think a lot of people have a hard time, especially what I recognize when people are like, oh, I just started learning about personal finance is something I really want to take care of and learn more about. The hard thing is once you're kind of getting into this world, and I remember doing this too, you do realize a lot of external forces impacting kind of your thoughts and your actions. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, sometimes what you need to do in order to live the life that you do want and not feel bad and associate money with negative feelings is to kind of, take a look at some of your relationships and see if you need to
Yeah.
let any go. Because there's definitely some people that I let go of in my life. And now looking back, I'm glad they were, if someone's not adding value to your life, or
Mhm.
if you feel drained and not so good about yourself after hanging out with them, that's
Mhm.
not, a good situation.
Absolutely. And I think like on top of that too is like I know a lot of people have a lot of hesitation around even just talking about money with their girlfriends, or
Oh,
their
yeah.
friends, because it just feels like such a hush hush against like shameful topic. And in that, because no one's talking about it, we're kind of stuck kind of going along, like spending money, going out, even though, you may not be able to afford to do so. So I think it's also important that, again, like you said, understand those relationships that you do value and that you do have the safety and space to be vulnerable, right? To be like, hey, you know what, I'm working towards this goal, or, money's a little bit tight right now. Could we do something else instead? I can promise you, and I've seen this with my clients as well, it opens doors for conversations to be had around money, and you hear the same thing from someone else. And I think because of social media, where everyone's best lives are out there, for display, and like no one's posting receipts about their dinners or, how much their purse actually cost. We just assume everyone is fine financially, but behind closed door, we never truly know, right? Everything can be funded by a credit card, right? How do we know? It's by opening up that dialogue.
Yeah, I always used to assume, like I used to work downtown, like right on Bay Street in Toronto. And, also I worked at a law firm. And so everyone looked amazing. Everyone was spending money all the time. It was actually a very toxic environment. Talk about triggering. I can't even go into the building without feeling bad. But I used to always think, like, going on the subway and seeing people that were like my age have these expensive clothes and purses and technology and stuff like that. And I'm like, how on earth can they afford that? Like, I can't afford that. And I'd always assumed that they were making more or something. No, you really never know. They could be funding it with, their credit card, or you don't know. Maybe they get an allowance from their parents.
Totally.
But it's one of those things, like you mentioned. I think that's such an important thing to remember is, number one, standing up for yourself with your friends, to be like, no, I need to take care of me, and this isn't in my budget, or this isn't in alignment with my goals. But like you said, like, it is such a great opening to talk about money, because maybe they're waiting for someone to open that to start that conversation, and you're that person. So I think someone's always waiting for the other person to talk about money. And there's so many times where I've seen, like, for me, so many of my friends love to talk to me about money because they don't know who else to talk to, but they know that I'm like a safe space, non-judgmental and stuff like that. So I feel like, there's probably a lot of people out there, including your friends, who actually do want to talk about it, but they're waiting for someone else to bring it up.
For sure. And I think another thing that I've noticed is, like, for sure. I think also is, like, social activities are so expensive sometimes. You know what I mean? And I also, like, see a lot that people are like, okay, dinners and drinks and this and that. And so with my clients, when, again, like, we're trying to understand their spending and rein that in a little bit, I'm always like, let's think about some alternatives. At the end of the day, all you wanted to get out of this time together is sort of like that exactly, like, spending time together, having quality time together. How you do that doesn't necessarily mean you always have to spend money, right? And I think that we're always so caught up in this idea of, like, spending time together means, spending money. But we can, like, do like a potluck thing at the house, or like a movie night in, or something really chill. And I think in a way we're almost wired to be like, no, that's weird. Right? Like, why would I, I can just go out and have this nice dinner and whatnot. Like, why would I do that? So again, just very interesting, like, I guess, layers to, I guess, even, like, the societal pressures of money and spending money and all that.
Yeah. I think it's also helpful to have people that are, like, on the same path, or quite honestly, income level. Like, for me, like, that's honestly never been a big issue. Like, I don't have friends that want to go to fancy restaurants.
Yeah.
So I don't even now. I'm like, no, like, we're still pretty, my husband works in the arts industry. And so, it's never like, oh, let's go to the most expensive restaurant. It's like, no, let's just go to this dive bar. And so, I think sometimes that helps, is also finding people that are, doing the same thing as you, that want to. And that's why you always encourage us, like, find people who are, wanting to achieve the same things that you want to achieve, finding those communities, whether they're online or you can find offline communities. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, just because I think we didn't really chat about this, but it's pretty incredible that you were, even with some of your things mentioning, like, you have, sometimes a hard time spending money, or the frugality aspect of your upbringing, but you were still somehow able to kind of, turn that scarcity mindset, which is, something I deal with all the time, into that abundance mindset and achieve, a $100,000 net worth by 26. Like that's crazy. I probably had like $10,000 at 26. How are you able to do that? Like that is a huge, huge accomplishment. What kind of things did you do in order to make that happen?
Yeah, for sure. So I think number one, again, like that privilege of being able to live at home. I'm gonna, own that as it is.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't
That's
have
huge
to.
though. Yeah.
Definitely didn't have to, again, like pay monthly bills, etc. But again, with the caveat that, there are times where I do spend a lump sum of money on my parents or the household. But anyway, so yeah, that was definitely an aspect of it. Another thing too is I was really strategic with how I, moved through my milestones. So when I first graduated university, I had my student loans. And so I was like, I need to pay off this student loan because it just feels like a weight on my shoulders. And once I'm done with that, I can move on to like the next thing, which was savings. So for me, again, being able to live at home, I was able to pay off the student loans and then move on to saving money. But again, especially early on in that journey, that frugality aspect kept coming up for me, right? Of like, oh, I shouldn't be spending money. I should just be saving it. And what I really found helped was really segregating my income into 3 categories, which was my expenses, then my savings goals and investing goals, and then my spending money. And so my spending money, I got to blow to $0, every two weeks. And that changed the game for me. That's where I felt like, again, I was able to enjoy my life, as a mid-20 something old, but still be like financially responsible. I was still doing everything I needed to do and take care of. And so strategically, that was definitely something that helped me along that journey. And another thing too is increasing my income.
Yeah,
right?
That's always a
Like,
big factor, right?
yeah,
Like that's a game changer.
for sure. And I think that's not talked about enough. And like
Mm-mm.
this idea of like, we always need to cut back expenses and cut and cut and cut. And I'm like, no. Like this whole other world of like bringing in more money totally changes the game, right? It's a lot more flexibility. And so that for me, that was like through negotiating my salary at work, bonuses, and then even starting my side hustle, which up until this year wasn't making me much money, but this year it has. And I've seen the fruits of like that labor as well. Like, hey, this idea of bringing in more money accelerates my savings goals.
Yeah, like I feel like you're so right. It doesn't get talked about, but I think like it makes sense why people like to focus on like the frugality and cutting back is like that's an easy thing you could do right away. It's not as easy to like just make more money. I remember
for sure.
I used to see there's a few financial experts like online. This was years ago. This was like literally years ago because I was in my 20s and super broke. And they were talking about like, well, just make more money. I'm like, well, that's easy for you, someone who's in their 30s, 40s, making a certain level. But it's like I was in that space where it's like, I totally get it. Like the people on the Instagram reel, I'm like, I totally get it. I was in a similar situation. So I feel you. I didn't like when I was starting to invest, all I could afford was like $200. And that was literally like, oh my God, it's all like, it felt like all my money. Like I was just like, oh my gosh. And so I understand it feels like that's impossible to increase your income when you've maybe never been able to. You've always lived on a certain income level.
Yeah.
But it is possible. It's not easy. But yeah, similar to you, I did the side hustle thing. The other big thing is honestly switching employers, not to like be that millennial that's promoting job hopping, but every time I've left an employer, I've made an extra $10,000, if not more. So honestly, it's not about sticking it out and getting raises and bonuses. Sometimes you can really jack up your income just by switching companies.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That's kind of my 2 cents, but I feel like employers are probably, now that we're in this, like, what is it? The great resignation.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's like, this is actually the perfect time to do that, isn't it? What are you talking about? You have all the leverage. This is like the opposite to like my experience being like a, great recession millennial where I'm like, oh my God, I'll work here for free. I just need I need a job on the resume. Gosh, now it's like, take advantage of this really weird world we're in. And like, I talk to so many people like, oh, I hate my job. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the best time to start looking for another job.
Yeah,
people are clamoring for employees. No one wants to work apparently. So this is it. But I'm curious, the side hustle thing, I'm mean, that's been a big topic for a number of years, and it makes sense. But I think the other argument I've been seeing is, oh, great, we just need to monetize every
Yeah.
passion project or hobby now. Like it maybe has gone a little bit too far. What are your kind of sentiments on that? Like for me, it's been great, but I can understand if you like to make candles for fun, do we need to have a candle shop? I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think this idea of like the hustle culture definitely became, toxic. And this idea like we always need to be on and productive and working like that. I mean, that is capitalism, right? Like that is capitalism at work. Again, for me, like my story, I always wanted to work with people in the realm of personal finance and have like a brand around financial education. And so it was a no-brainer for my side hustle to be, first starting off a passion project, but really ultimately, my bread and butter. But I think for other people out there, yeah, I think as long as you love your 9 to 5, or again, maybe you don't love it, but you're totally okay with it, you're not looking to do anything else, um, having like side projects and like, passions and stuff like that, it's still a great, creative outlet, right? And I don't think you need to fall into that pressure of like learning how to market it on Instagram and do all that, because then that passion project just becomes another job, and that will change everything for you. It won't be what it was before. So again, that's sort of my 2 cents on it. I totally see both sides. And again, like what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I always like to remind people that just because you want to if you want to start a side hustle, and whether that means starting your own business or just doing like Uber or whatever
Yeah.
to make some extra money, I think people always like forget that. I'm like, you don't have to do it forever. Like it can be a temporary fix for you just saving a certain amount of money. And then once you've reached your goal, you can quit. Like you do not have to continue doing it for the long haul. Like for me, I always personally thought I was going to just do this side hustle. I never wanted to do this full time, but here we are. And I thought I was just going to do it for a few years, make my money, and invest it, and then eventually at a certain point, when I got into a certain maybe role in the career that I was pursuing, which was more marketing. Then I'd quit, and it just didn't work out that way. I think for the better, but but again, it's like, I never thought I was going to do this permanently. It was literally a temporary, like I started to try to monetize my blog and stuff like that as a temporary means to earn some more money so I can beef up my emergency fund, put more money into my retirement fund, go traveling and stuff like that. So I think that's the other thing to remember is like, you don't have to do it forever. You could just do it for a little amount of time and then stop whenever you like.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to do it at all. Like there's other, ways, and maybe it's just about focusing on how to really grow the career you're in.
Yeah.
Or switch careers entirely. I've been seeing a lot of that actually.
Absolutely.
Now I think we've kind of touched on this, but just because I really want to, make sure we do talk about it. Everyone, we've talked a lot about everyone comes from different backgrounds and circumstances, but you're a woman of color, and I feel like this is, more people are talking about their stories, and I think there's been more talk about how there needs to 100% be more, there needs to be more diversity in the financial space, because it's a very I don't know if you follow Hey Berna, but she, like, her kind of tagline is like, the financial industry is hella male and hella pale, and I'm like, that is 100% what it is. What are some like unique financial struggles that maybe women of color specifically encounter, and what are some things that they can do to kind of overcome that, if that's something that's even possible? Is it more of a societal thing, or is there individual things that they can do?
Yeah, the two things that come up for me are around sort of salary negotiation and workaholism. And the second one being a money disorder called financial enabling. Financial enabling is when, we feel secure only when other people around us are, secure. So what that might look like is someone might need money. And even though you technically can't afford to give it to them, you're still going to do it because, hey, that person's going to feel good, and therefore you'll feel good. So that codependency that exists. And I think as women and women of color, this idea that we always need to be good daughters, good wives, good moms comes up a lot. And so like that, it's almost in a way self-sabotage, right? Constantly being there for others financially without looking out for yourselves. So that's definitely one theme that I see recurring with the clients that I work with. Again, because they are women of color from immigrant upbringings. And I think what I always recommend there is really learning to set some financial boundaries. What that looks like for me, like I have a family fund, like literally in my savings account, I have one dedicated family account. And so I'll siphon money off into there. And if my parents ask or someone asks, like that's the fund that I pull from. Right. And that reduces that resentment of, oh, okay, like I can't really afford to, but here you go, etc. And so I always encourage my clients like, hey, let's take care of you first, right? Your emergency fund, your debt repayment, your invest, and then let's set up this fund for, XYZ person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so smart. That's really smart. And I feel like, I've never heard of that before. I mean, I actually encountered that with a client I worked with a number of years ago. He was originally from Venezuela, and we were looking at his budget and trying to rework things. He had some debt and also some savings goals. And I'm like, oh, what's this kind of line, thing here, or this line in your spending? Is like, oh, that's me sending money back home to my family.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, is that really important to you? He's like, I need to always send money back to my family. And so I'm like, okay, how do we make sure that we're saving instead of it coming out of some other, your savings goal for this, we need to make sure it's its own savings goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the other point I touched on, which is the idea of workaholism and salary negotiation. Again, being women of color in a workspace, a corporate environment, etc., it's always like we're on this chase for excellence to prove ourselves, right? Like, oh, if I just do this for my boss or work extra hours and not even being paid, what I'm worth, it's fine. Because in a way, it's sort of ingrained with us, like, oh, this is all we're worth, right? Mm-hmm. This is all that we can get, and we should be thankful. And I think as children of immigrants, this idea of having privilege with your career choices, also didn't exist for me growing up. Right. Because for me, I was like, again, the idea of it, being a lawyer and a doctor, et cetera, sure, that was the case. But it was also this idea of stability, right? Having a stable career, not necessarily a career in the arts or the creative field. That felt, irresponsible to me. And so I think, again, those are just some other themes I've seen some of my clients.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think those are, I'm sure people listening are, oh yeah, that's relatable. Mm-hmm. I could definitely relate to that. So now before I let you go, because I know, so you offer services and you have so much great content, where can people find more information about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, you can find me at parween.mander. I'm always there. So shoot me a DM. We'll love to connect with you guys. And then my website is linked in my bio, but it's www.thewealthywolfe.ca. And you can find, how to work with me there, some free resources, etc.
Where does the name The Wealthy Wolfe come? That was the number one question I had, and I never got to it. I'm like, oh, good, you mentioned your name. Yeah. Where did that come from? I like the name, but where's that come from?
So to me, the wolf always represented this duality that related to my identity. So the wolf, it was sort of it can be alone, independent, do its thing, but also this family-oriented, in a pack sort of idea. And as a daughter of immigrants, I'm like, this is literally my identity, which I'm trying to, I'm always struggling with, which is being there for myself, but also being there for others. And so, the wolf, I have paintings around my room around it. And so, my fiance was the one that put together the hey, Wealthy Wolfe. I'm like, hey, that's it.
I love that alliteration. We've got that. It's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of this stuff. I really appreciate you sharing and educating everybody who's listening. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Appreciate it.
And that was episode 308 with the amazing Parween Mander. You can find her at the Wealthy Wolfe, and Wolf has an E at the end, .ca. You can also just go to the show notes to find more information about her and all the links where you can connect with her at jessicamorehouse.com/308. You can also follow her on Twitter at Parween Mander, very easy, and on Instagram at parween.mander. Again, just go to the show notes. I have everything linked, so it's very easy for you to find her and, possibly book a one-on-one coaching call with her. So lots of things to share with you. So do not go away. Stick around. I have just a few words I want to share about this podcast episode sponsor, and then I will be right back. This episode of the More Money Podcast is supported by Motley Fool Canada. Interested in leveling up your stock market knowledge and skills? Want to dip your toes into investing in individual stocks by taking a methodical get-rich-slowly approach? Then consider signing up to Stock Advisor Canada. I've personally been a member for 2 years now, and I'll tell you why as a loud and proud index investor I signed up. Because they are all about playing the long game. You won't see them promoting hot stocks you can flip for a supposed quick profit. They are focused on educating Canadians about long-term stock investing and even recommend holding stocks for at least 5 years because, as we all know, patience is an investor's greatest asset. Not only does membership include buy and sell recommendations, weekly updates, special reports, and member forums, it also has their premium hub with members-only live streams, exclusive videos, and more. So no matter if you want to start investing in stocks or just improve your overall investing knowledge, consider joining over 70,000 of your fellow Canadian investors today by signing up to Stock Advisor Canada. And if you visit fool.ca/Jessica, you can save 66% off your membership. Once again, to sign up and get 66% off, visit fool.ca/Jessica. Okay, so first things first, reminder. There's only a few more weeks left of this show, and that means there's only limited time for you to enter to win a copy of one of the books that I'm giving away. So reminder, giving away a copy of all of the books that have been featured on this season of the show. If you go to jessicamorehouse.com/contest, you can find all of the books. You can enter to win all of them. You will only win one, but you can enter to win, so you've got lots of chances. And honestly, there's not a huge group of people that have entered these contests, so the odds are in your favor. So make sure to go to jessicamorehouse.com/contest to find out what all of those books are and enter to win, and good luck. And also, it's fun to get a package in the mail. Who doesn't love a package in the mail from yours truly? Actually, it will be from my sister, but but hey, that's kind of cool too. She's a connection to me, so why not? Anyways, let's see, what else do I have to share with you? Oh yeah, so big thing that you'll definitely want to know about is, hey, I have got an investing course, and you're going to want to take the last few weeks out of this year to apply, because I will be raising the price in the new year. So if you go to jessicamorehouse.com/WBB, you can also just go to the show notes for this episode, jessicamorehouse.com/308. You can find the link to the landing page. But yeah, so Wealth Building Blueprint for Canadians. It is a course that really takes you through the fundamentals of investing all the way to the end, where I show you specifically how to build your own investment plan and portfolio so you can be an index investor like myself and like I have talked about at nauseum. Is it at nauseum or ad nauseum? Well, I'm just going to keep both of those in, and you can choose which one is right for you. Anyways, if you want to, participate in passive investing and, really start building your wealth, well, I've got a course for you. Obviously, this is specifically for Canadians, but if you're a Canadian listening, this might be something that you're interested in, because, man, are there a lot of courses out there that are for Americans. So if you're looking for something specific about Canadians, so we can talk about Canadian taxation and registered accounts and Canadian products and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I've got all that good stuff in the course. So jessicamorehouse.com/WBB is where you can find more information about that and to apply. Let's see, what else do I have for you? I feel like those are the main things. I'm just kind of wrapping things up at this point. Let's see, where are we? I'm just recording this obviously in advance, so spoiler. Oh yeah, I think right today I'm actually on a plane to Vancouver to see my family for the holidays, which, so excited, because I have not been able, wasn't able to have the holiday, that we usually have, me and my husband with our families last year because of the pandemic. We're luckily able to see our families this summer, but we had to do Christmas alone last year and New Year's. And you know how it wasn't sad. We had we made the best of it, but it's not the same, it's just not the same. So I'm so freaking excited to be back home for the holidays. I hope you are too. I'm very, I hope you're able to hang out with friends and family during this, the holiday season. Anyways, that's all I have to share with you. Nothing else. Besides, tomorrow I have a bonus episode for you that you're not going to want to miss. It is also I've got a great guest about investing. We're going to dive deep. It's going to be good. It's going to be a good one. I'm really excited that I have this guest on the show, actually, so I'm pretty stoked. So just check back here tomorrow. But otherwise, a big thank you for listening, and a huge shout out to my wonderful podcast editor, Matt Rideout. I'll see you back here tomorrow for a fresh new episode of the More Money Podcast. See you then.